Hello everyone and welcome to We Are Sunderland. I'm Matty Hewitt, one of the Sunderland writers here. We're launching a brand new website in the new year, bringing you everything you need to know about the Black Cats. So that includes exclusive interviews, deep dive tactical analysis, podcasts and more. You may have already seen us on some socials, so if you could drop us a like, follow, subscribe, that'd be hugely appreciated. Today I'm joined by Jonny McFarlane of the Rangers Review. How are you, mate?
I'm very good. Looking forward to discussing Michael Beale's tenure at Rangers and what he can do for you at Sunderland.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one place to start, and that's with Michael Beale. I was at his press conference yesterday, and I thought he came across quite well, but obviously we'll get on to some of that later on. I mean, firstly, were you surprised by that appointment at all?
No, I think Michael, if you look at his CV across his time in football, up to the point he takes the Rangers job, it's extremely solid. He comes up, and I think his time at Rangers can be looked at in two chunks. I think last season, which most people would say he did just about what could have been expected with the squad he had and the quality he was going up against. Obviously, Ange Postecoglou, I think people have seen what he's capable of in the Premier League, and he created a very, very good Celtic side. So it was far from easy. And I don't think the squad that was at Rangers last season was equipped to win that league. And they were 9 points behind when he took over.
Yeah.
So I think down south in England, I think there's a tendency to kind of look past Scottish football a little bit. And I think people at Sunderland would have been concentrating on his CV prior to his time at Rangers, and probably would have looked at his CV dispassionately about his time at Rangers and maybe looked at some of the circumstances and thought he's worth a gamble. One thing that over the course of the time that Michael Beale's been on the scene is that there's been many testimonies to his quality as a football coach. It's undeniable. There's so many players that have said unprompted, Michael Beale is a phenomenal football coach. Now, there's a big debate about whether that transmits to being a fantastic manager, which is a different role. But certainly as a coach, there's no doubt about Michael Beale's credentials. Even in his time in Aston Villa, there's a number of players who have said that he was top quality on the training pitch. And I think
you've touched on it there. Sorry, I mean that is in part the main difference, isn't it, between Rangers and Sunderland. Yesterday at his press conference, he spoke a lot about the departure of Ross Wilson. We'll no doubt get onto his sort of second tenure at the club. But do you think that is a role that will suit him more, the role of a head coach, rather than that of a manager and having to manage upwards as well as downwards?
Yeah, I think Michael Beale's strength is on the coaching pitch, which is kind of what I was trying to get to there. He is undoubtedly a guy who has got a lot of nous. I think Steven Gerrard famously said of Michael Beale, I could spend the next 20 years coaching and I still wouldn't be as good a coach as Michael Beale. So that's one of the guys who is absolutely top in the game, giving him a really big push. And Steven Gerrard's not the sort of guy that would say that unless he believed it.
Yeah.
Now, he I think will be a good fit for that role. I don't think Michael Beale can't be a manager down the line or anything like that. You know, Rangers is a very tough club to manage, extraordinarily tough, and it was a very tough time to go in. As I say, I mentioned that the fact he was going up against Ange Postecoglou, who's a very very good manager, as we're seeing. There's already chat about him being the next Man City manager, so I think that tells you about the level of Ange Postecoglou. Where Beale went wrong at Rangers was, I think, in the summer, he put a lot of emphasis on a vast rebuild. He brought in 9 players, and under him, those players didn't spark. Now, what we're seeing now is perhaps a little bit of a reinterpretation of some of those signings, because some of them are now coming onto a game. So, for example, Cyril Dessers, who Rangers spent best part of £5 million on to bring from Cremonese in Serie A, he scored 3 goals in 15 games under Michael Beale. But now, under the new manager, he's got 6 and 12.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're talking about a striker with 9 goals, who's starting to hit the net more regularly, and people are starting to maybe reassess how they perceive the summer business. So it was very early Beale got sacked. That should be said. I think he'll probably say that he would have fancied his chances once the players had been more settled to turn it round. Personally, I don't think it would have turned round. I think sometimes in football, you get to a point where the downward slide is irreversible. I think Rangers had to act at the time. But I don't think that necessarily makes Michael Beale damaged goods or anything like that. I think, especially in a slightly reformed role, I don't see why he can't really give Sunderland a lot. And he's clearly a solid football brain. You don't go to clubs like Sao Paulo. You don't get taken by Steven Gerrard. If you don't have that. And listen, you'll see, and the Sunderland fans will see from his pressers that he's a guy that absolutely lives and breathes and loves football, and he's clearly got tactical nous about him. Even though, listen, Rangers fans are quite, I think, still quite hot about it because the start of the season, there's no dressing it up, Matty. It was not good.
Yeah,
I think they lost 3 domestic matches under Beale. That's a no can do so early in that. In the season, it means you're not going to win the league. And at Rangers, it's all about beating Celtic and winning the league. Second is nothing.
Yeah.
European-wise, they didn't make the Champions League, which was another element. Although it was a terribly unlucky draw. PSV, who Rangers played, 2-2 draw at Ibrox, very good result. And I'll tell you why it's a very good result, because last time I looked at the table, which was I think last week, they were 15-0-0. Played 15, won 15. Drawn none, lost none. And I think they'd only conceded something ridiculous like 5 goals. So that's in the Dutch league, and PSV have qualified for the last 16 in the Champions League. So such a difficult one, that.
I mean, he touched on a few things at his press conference yesterday. Firstly, he was obviously hugely complimentary to Rangers. He wished Philippe Clement all the best. He said that some of the best times he had in football were up there at Ibrox. He spoke a lot about his time with Steven Gerrard. Obviously, they went invincible. He was one of the coaches there. What sort of role did he play behind the scenes? Because I've looked at his second sort of interview of when he went back, and he made a few interesting comments about saying he wasn't closely friends with the players, but he was more of a disciplinarian. Is that something that came across sort of to you when he was there, but sort of on both occasions?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think you need to separate the 2 spells.
Yeah.
The first spell was obviously a different role for him. He was actually, Gary McAllister was the assistant manager, and he was sort of like the first team coach.
Yeah.
I think Gerrard, one of the things that he did really, really well, and he was very clever about, he was the figurehead of the club. He was very much a manager, and he let Michael Beale take the training and deal with the training. And he was self-aware enough to know, as I said with that quote about being the best coach, and you would have to practice for 20 years to be as good as Michael Beale. He was self-aware enough to know that Beale was better on the training pitch, so let him go and do his thing. And Michael Beale has spoken many times about getting a lot of autonomy under Steven Gerrard, and being given a lot of trust. And but I don't think that should be translated into thinking that he was like the kind of buddy. I don't think that was the case. I think Michael Beale was quite hard on some players if he thought it would get the best out of them. He wasn't the player's friend, that type of coach. He was creating, I think, high quality sessions that the players loved. I think they were creative, they were innovative, they were different. These are words that I've had fired back at me from players who were involved in them. And he was a key figure, I think, tactically, in the changes that were made over the 3-year period that led fundamentally to Rangers' 55th title, the most important one, arguably, in the club's history, because it stopped Celtic winning 10 in a row, and after a decade of pain, brought the title back to Ibrox. Now, that didn't just, as I've just said, took 3 years. But it really didn't happen overnight in terms of the way the team played. There was a genuine evolution, and I think Michael Beale had a big part to play in the tweaks that took place. So for example, at the start of the reign, it was very much a traditional 4-3-3. It was high press, very, very good at winning the ball high up the pitch and counter-attacking. The problem with that is Rangers face a low block every week, and it actually becomes about how do you protect against a counter-attack while being totally and utterly ball dominant in 90% of your games in Scotland? I mean, English football fans would be appalled if they watched the average Rangers game in Scotland, because it is like 10 men behind the ball. And the striker is basically a functioning midfield general, sort of running about making tackles. That's how deep that teams play. There's virtually no space. So it's all about overwhelming the opponents. And that's why Postecoglou, to mention him again, was so successful, because it was an overwhelming attacking philosophy. And I think it took a while for Gerrard to kind of tweak his original vision to suit Scottish football. And Michael Beale was a key part of that. And it went through a number of incarnations, but finally settled on what was effectively a 4-3-2-1 Christmas tree formation with two number 10s in behind the striker and the width coming from the fullbacks. And the three midfielders were very flat, with the two on the right and on the left dropping in to cover the fullbacks. Very, very highly coached. You could see the patterns of play had been drilled into the players on the pitch. And it really looked like someone was the brains behind this, because you could always see the stamp of the coach on the team. Now, whether that was thought at the time to be very much Beale, perhaps as things went on, there was more debate about that, because I don't think the same could be said for the second spell. But then I think it's also fair to say there was extenuating circumstances around that, given the number of new players that had come in. But I think Beale was very much the one who's the guy who came up with this idea of using two number 10s rather than two wingers, and that was absolutely what pushed Rangers to the 55th title. The season that they won that, that setup with two 10s to create in behind the number 9 was absolutely pivotal. And I think Beale came up with it because Alfredo Morelos, who was a lone striker for Rangers, was suspended, and Jermaine Defoe came in, and he was obviously a veteran and needed support. And the idea was to get players up in and around them.
Yeah.
So that's where the genesis of it came from, and that became the kind of core and final way of playing under Gerrard. So I think Beale was just absolutely huge, and seen fundamentally as the brain behind that coaching team. So in terms of winning that title, which was just so monstrous in the club's history, obviously he became a figure that was storied. And there's no doubt about it. A figure alongside Gerrard that was really, really well regarded and well liked. And all of this was underlined by the fact that players who had played under him kept on coming out and saying, this guy's an absolute monster on the training field. He's unbelievable. He's top level, blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty constant from players. You didn't hear too many moans about Michael Beale, put it that way. It was all positivity. He goes away at that point, goes down to Aston Villa, and works under Steven Gerrard there, and then decides, right, I've got enough training under my belt for this role. I'm going to go out and strike out on my own. Goes to QPR, does very well, and it coincides with the Rangers job opening back up when Giovanni van Bronckhorst is sacked. And I think most people felt that it was an obvious appointment.
Mm-hmm.
Because Beale had started pretty well at QPR. I think they were 7th when he left. He turned down the Wolves job, so he really was in he was held in high regards, a Premier League club coming in for him. And he just felt, I think Michael Beale felt he couldn't turn down the Rangers job. He knows how big the club is. He knows he would be... there's only been 19 managers in the club's 151, 52-year history. And I think the lure of being number 18 was just too much for him to put to one side. And he came into the club at a really, really difficult time. His first season, I think, went as well as he could have done. There's problems with Rangers' squad. He got them to the final of the League Cup. He got to the semi-final of the Scottish Cup, defeated by Celtic in both, which is a painful one. But these were close games. decided by, moments. Fashion Sakala in both games missed really, really good opportunities, pretty much open goals.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair to Michael Beale, he inherited a 9-point gap, and when the season ended, I think it was 7 points in the league. So I don't think there was an awful lot more he could have done, and you never felt that Ange Postecoglou's teams had kind of out-thought him tactically.
Yeah.
I think he got the teams about as right as he could have, given the quality he had. It was no doubt in anyone's mind Rangers needed strikers. So at that point, he had full backing of the fans going into the new season. And he talked a lot, as Michael does. I think he's very open with the media, which is to be from our point of view, Matty, to be admired and to be welcomed. And he talked a lot about how he was going to rebuild the squad. And unfortunately, I just think he didn't prepare the fans well enough for the reality of building a football squad in the summer, which is it's going to take time. Michael was very, I think, overconfident about putting together a team that would just gel. And Michael understands Rangers intrinsically. He knows what it is there and the pressures of the job, and that you need to win. So I think he should have spent more time talking about, there's a total rebuild. We all agree there's a rebuild needed, but it might take a little time to gel. And it didn't gel. Rangers lost the first game of the season to Kilmarnock 1-0. And from that point, he's on the back foot. Then they lose to Celtic at home 1-0. To be honest, Matty, it was a game that Rangers probably on paper, if you watched it, totally unbiased observer, you'd have probably thought Rangers deserved to win. Rangers just shaded the game. But they were limp in front of goal again, missed chances.
He sort of mentioned that yesterday, that was small margins that had cost him his time at Rangers. In particular, I know yourselves at Rangers Review said it unravelled quite quickly.
Yes.
Is that a fair reflection that it was sort of small margins, or do you think there's more sort of to it?
It depends on your point of view. I think Michael Beale can have that point of view, and I don't think it's an unfair point of view. But I also think there'll be people who are extremely close observers who will say that there was a lot of warning signs over a longer period of time. So the team weren't good in pre-season. I think the big thing about Michael Beale was you were always expecting the team to have a very solid identity and look like they knew what they were doing, like they absolutely were drilled in their roles. And to be honest, in the second season, you never really felt that watching them. You never really felt that it was cohesive. Now, again, it's 9 new players, Matty. 9. So plus 2 players that had arrived in the January window, and Cantwell and Raskin, both excellent, by the way. So 11 in kind of 6 months. And it's just clear that a lot of them didn't quite settle in as quickly as they could have. That I think because of results, Michael was maybe in 2 minds about what he wanted to do with the team, and there was a bit of chopping and changing. I think there was and I don't know this for sure, but I suspect Michael wanted to play 2 up front for most games in Scotland, and kind of on the ball, Rangers would probably be something akin to a 4-1-2-1-2, like a diamond. And I just don't think it worked. Fundamentally, I just don't think it worked. Now, it worked kind of before. They'd played it in the Gerrard era. Towards the end of the Gerrard era, I talked about that 2 number 10s and behind the striker. There was a final evolution at the end of the Gerrard era towards this kind of diamonds, or even a 4-3-1-2, as opposed to a 4-3-2-1. But it was right at the end, maybe in the last 3 months of the 55 season, and then into the next season when Gerrard left quite early in the season. I think that's what he was going for, but results dictated he had to change it because it wasn't working. So then he moved towards bringing in wingers, but then it was wingers that he'd almost tried to move on, people like Scott Wright, and it was a bit of a mess, to be honest, by the end. And the final defeat against Aberdeen, which is the third of the defeats, obviously cemented that he was going to have to go. And I was in the presser with Michael on that last game, and you could just tell with his body language, he knew that he was in deep trouble at that point. But any Rangers manager that loses to Celtic regularly is going to be under pressure, and he lost to Celtic regularly. So the big thing was with Michael Beale, you look at his win percentage, it's outstanding. I think it's 77%.
Yeah, he mentioned that yesterday as well. He mentioned that yesterday as well and said that because obviously there's been a reaction from Sunderland supporters given the names that they've been linked with, Will Still. There was a general belief that they'd go in the direction of this foreign coach, and it's a bizarre situation at Sunderland to sack the manager 3 points outside of the playoffs, to then bring someone in who they view as having failed at QPR, having started so well, dropped off a bit, to then having failed at Rangers. He was quick to remind people yesterday that take a look at this win percentage. It's actually one of the highest of any Rangers manager of all time.
It's the highest, but it's that old one about statistics. There's lies, damned lies, and statistics. And the truth is, Michael lost all the big games as Rangers manager, with the exception of maybe drawing 2-2 with PSV, which was a good result, especially in retrospect with how good PSV are. Losing to Celtic the amount he did, and listen, it's hard to put this into context for your listeners who aren't Rangers orientated, but I'll try. The loss at Celtic at home came at a time when Celtic were totally decimated with injuries.
Yeah.
Were in poor form, and have just hired a manager a lot of the fans don't want at the club because of the way he left the club the last time. Now, Brendan's obviously a really good manager, Brendan Rodgers, but he was going through a really tough spell. And Rangers didn't have any of these injury issues, really. They were in much stronger place, and they were at home. There was no Celtic fans in the ground. And Celtic scored and then controlled the game. Rangers powered forward and created chances, but you always felt Celtic were sitting back and saying, right, come on and try and score. So yes, they didn't create a lot, and yes, Rangers had the better of the play. But you almost felt, I hope this makes sense, Celtic kind of had control of that. They were deliberately doing that. And I think for a lot of fans, that was the kind of final straw, that such a weak Celtic, and Celtic, honestly, the team line for that day is as weak as Celtic have ever been in an Old Firm game in the last few years. I think that did it for a lot of fans. A lot of fans at that point said, no, this guy's not the right guy for Rangers. But just because it went like that at Rangers, I don't think you should be writing off Michael Beale at all. I think sometimes in football, the best deals are the ones you do when you go and get someone who's hurting, who's had a bad spell. Now, Tony Mowbray, who you mentioned, is a joke figure in Scotland at Celtic because he came in, he bought a load of players, most of them were hopeless, and he was gone within 6 months after getting beaten 4-0 by St Mirren.
Yeah.
So Tony Mowbray came in and just couldn't hack it at Celtic, and has went on to be a very successful, I think, Championship manager, and has done well at most of the clubs he's been at. Did well at Blackburn, did well at Coventry. I think most people think he did quite well at Sunderland. So I'd be wary of writing off a manager on the basis of one spell. I think if you look at the larger career and you look at where Michael Beale was in terms of his profile in England just a year ago, I think this is a smart move by Sunderland, especially in the structure that Michael Beale was talking about, and that the chief executive was talking about at the presser yesterday. Coming in as head coach, I can see why that will work. Yeah.
He touched on it himself as well yesterday. He said, look, Sunderland's a club where I feel I can fulfill my potential as well as a head coach. He's really well thought of behind the scenes as a coach, but he's only had the stint at, I think from Sunderland fans' point of view, it's more not necessarily a lack of experience, but just the short time he's had at QPR, he's had at Rangers. It was interesting, a point that you made there about the low blocks and the style of play. When Sunderland were in League One, they were horrific at breaking down a low block. When they come up against the likes of Leeds United, West Brom in recent weeks, teams that want to play, Leicester, albeit they got beat, so Sunderland come into their own when it's an expansive game and they can do that. What they have struggled with is when teams come to the Stadium of Light or they play away from home, and there is that low block. Now, Christian Speakman, again, sporting director, spoke about Michael's experience of playing against teams like that in Rangers, and how that again aligned, and there was a good fit for Beale at Sunderland.
Well, absolutely. And Michael Beale's got all this European experience as well, which you have to take into account. Rangers were European also-rans when Steven Gerrard arrived in 2018. To put it in context, they were pumped out of Europe the season before by Progress Niederkorn of Luxembourg. So you couldn't get any lower. And Gerrard and Beale together put in the foundations for a team that would eventually get to the Europa League final.
Yeah.
So in terms of those kind of going up against teams that come out and play against you, I don't necessarily have too many worries about that in terms of Beale's coaching. I think he'll be fine, and he's shown that over the periods. Perhaps not as manager of Rangers, but I think he's got nous in that department. The low block thing, I think the 77% figure that you're talking about, that emphasises how good he was at basically delivering against teams that are sitting in deep. It was over a small sample size because it's only 11 months or whatever that Beale was in charge. But I think that's, again, shows that the CEO of Sunderland has put a fair amount of work into this appointment and has balanced all these elements. So one thing that you're not going to lack with Michael Beale is ideas. For example, he wrote an essay on his blog, because he has a blog. I don't think he's added to it much in the last few years. I've not looked at it recently, but one of the things he talked about in the blog was how best to play when you have a man down.
Yeah,
and he has a theory of football of how you change the team. And one thing that was absolutely apparent was that Rangers followed this theory. Whenever they had a man sent off, they would go to almost like a 4-3-2.
Yeah,
with the wingers coming in. And there was a number of times Rangers went a man down, and then in some cases looked stronger, including a game against Celtic at Parkhead. They had a man sent off, Alfredo Morelos, very early for a petulant swipe at, I think it was Scott Brown, a petulant kick. And Rangers went on to kind of dominate the game. Celtic won with a goal in the last 5 minutes from James Forrest, but Rangers came out of the game with all the plaudits because they'd played so well with 10 men. And that's one thing I would keep an eye out for. If Sunderland go down to 10 men, I think you'll see quite an interesting setup that's a little bit different to what you would normally see.
Yeah, well, I know you spoke there. You mentioned Tony Mowbray. He's really got the reputation of being down here and developing young talent. Something similar to Michael Beale having come through at Chelsea and Liverpool. Beale yesterday at his press conference spoke about not wanting to change too much, albeit he can't, because there's 4 games in the space of 10 days or so over the festive period. But I noticed as well, you said about a distinct style of play. What was that? Was it sort of high pressing, or I know it's been muted that his Rangers sides were very high in possession. I mean, what sort of style of play did he try and implement during his second spell as manager?
Well, I think this would be one of these ones where he definitely tried to play an attacking style of play, but as I sort of outlined, it just wasn't working.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people were saying we can't really see what he's trying to do here.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, he brought in a load of players. I think he had an idea of what he wanted to do. And some of those players weren't ready to go straight in. Some of those players needed time to adapt to Scottish football. Some of these players needed to get up to speed in terms of fitness because they didn't have a pre-season. Cyril Dessers, he talked about not having a proper pre-season, for example. And I think now you're starting to see him get fully fit. And and another manager is reaping the rewards of that. I think what he wanted to do was to play rock and roll football where you're really high up, you're winning the ball high up the pitch, you've got lots of bodies in the box, you're providing width through your fullbacks, and it's relentless. But that's not what we saw, and that's why he's out of a job.
Yeah.
Previously, as a coach under Steven Gerrard, certainly Rangers provided that. If you look back to Rangers in the season they won the title under Gerrard, they didn't lose a single game over 38 games.
Yeah.
And they didn't concede too many goals. I think it was something ridiculous, like 11 over the course of the whole season. I'd have to check. 11 or 14 is very low numbers. And they scored a lot of goals. And there was a lot of games where they crashed 4 or 5 past teams over the course of the season. Or certainly there was a few. So it depends on what part of Michael Beale's Rangers career you're kind of looking at, because there's no doubt it just didn't work this season. And trying to pick through the detritus of what was a bit of a disaster is it's hard to come out with too many positives. But I think, Matty, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone in football that doesn't have bad spells.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And Sunderland fans will be seeing a lot of negativity for Rangers fans. It's totally understandable, because fans are still quite hot about the way it went under Michael Beale. Losing 3 big games, losing to Celtic, losing to Aberdeen, losing to Kilmarnock on the opening day, getting knocked out of the Champions League before the group stage, and the signings, because Beale made a big point about how it was going to change with the new signings. But I think as time goes on, that'll calm down a bit.
Yeah.
People understand that, the last person that wanted Michael Beale to be sacked was Michael Beale. And fundamentally, we're starting to see now some of these signings come good. So, for example, Jack Butland, outstanding signing. He's been unbelievable for Rangers. Barely made a mistake. Todd Cantwell's been a great signing for Rangers. Nicholas Raskin's been a great signing for Rangers. So those 3 for a start. Now, down the line from Beale's departure, Dujon Sterling, a player that Michael Beale talked a lot about, knew from his time at Chelsea as a kid, really coming on a game and really looking like he's going to be a terrific player for Rangers. Philip Clement has already said, big player for the future. That's a Michael Beale signing, there's no doubt about it. So he's starting to look like someone that from the signings in the summer will come good. We had Kieran Dowell come in last night, play his first game under Philip Clement, looked really good, had a good game. Now, whether or not he'll stick around or not is another story, because I don't think he's anywhere near first pick. But again, he's come in under this new manager, and he's had some fitness issues, and he started to look like he could certainly do a job. And you go into the team, and I think the main one that people have an issue with, I said earlier, was that Rangers really needed strikers, and he's gone out and he's bought a player called Sam Lammers from Atalanta. He's bought Cyril Dessers from Cremonese, and Danilo from Feyenoord. And the truth is that none of them have really delivered the way I think Rangers would have hoped they would have. Now, Danilo's had injury issues. Cyril Dessers has had fitness issues. And Sam Lammers it's just not worked. It's one of those players, it's not worked and it's not going to work, is my view on it. The other 2, I think time will tell, because, as I say, Dessers is coming on to a game now. But given Beale was so insistent about the change that would happen when the signings were made, that's the thing that fans were quite upset about, that these players it was big money for Rangers. England's a totally different world. £13 million spent on strikers in Scotland is a huge amount of money in the context of Scotland. So I think Rangers fans are still pretty hot about that, and it'll take a bit of time before they can look back and be a bit more balanced about it. I'm trying to be as balanced as possible. I just think Beale has a lot going for him, and although it didn't work out, I think it's very, very dangerous and silly to write off someone on the basis of a failed 3 or 4 seasons. I think Beale has a lot going for him, and although it didn't work out, I think it's very, very dangerous and silly to write off someone on the basis of a failed 3 or 4 seasons. I think Beale has a lot going for him, and although it didn't work out, I think it's very, very dangerous and silly to write off someone on the basis of a failed failed time at one club. You know, he's got great experience, and for most people in life, when you have a failure, a professional failure, and we've all had them, it sets you up for your next success because you're hungry, you're desperate to impress, you want to show the world you've still got something. And I said this on Twitter, Matty. I would not be surprised one bit if Sunderland become a very good side under Michael Beale.
Yeah, that's something again that he spoke about yesterday. You know, his hunger and desire. He said he had a couple of months off, did a bit of travelling, even went to Lapland with the kids just to get some downtime, relax. Interestingly, Sunderland, obviously, the recruitment model is different. He won't be in charge of, or he won't be in charge. He'll have players put to him, and he will obviously have the final say. That was cleared up by Christian Speakman yesterday. Look, the manager's integral to the process, or the head coach, sorry, is integral, but it's a different role to manage, and that'll be different from his spell at Rangers. Sunderland have one of the youngest squads in the Championship. So just lastly, what was he like with the youngsters at Rangers? Because this will be one of, I don't want to say make or break because they haven't kicked a ball yet, but it'll play a huge part in how successful he is at Sunderland, is the development of these young players that they've got. Their model is to buy players with potential, develop them, and then in theory sell them for money or end up in the Premier League and build the club that sort of way. What was Beale like at Rangers with the younger talents?
Again, there's a long answer to this question, which is, truthfully, in terms of Beale's time at the club, he brought through young Bailey Rice, who was 16. He gave him a couple of opportunities. There's a few others that were skirting around the first team, but no young player made an impact under Michael Beale. And actually, a player that Michael Beale, I don't think, well, certainly didn't. I'm going to say he didn't fancy him. I don't think he fancied him. He certainly didn't. If he did fancy him, he certainly didn't give him too many opportunities. Ross McCausland, a young player from the academy, has been brought in by the new manager and has been a revelation, playing on the right wing. He's been excellent. So I think you would say that over his time at Rangers, there wasn't any young players that made a massive impact. That said, again, you have to go deeper into Michael Beale's CV. I don't think you can question Michael Beale's commitment to youth development. It's something he's been massively passionate about. I've watched Michael Beale, and you can find them on YouTube if you dig deep enough. You'll find presentations on youth football and youth development, and it's something I think he's an expert on. Yeah. So players like Declan Rice, Trent Alexander-Arnold, the list is Livramento. The list is huge of young quality talent that has been helped along the way by Michael Beale. You know, he's been at Liverpool, he's been at Chelsea, and he's spent a lot of time around these kind of youth setups. So that is something that I think makes him a good fit for Sunderland, given the profile of the squad there. He's someone that's capable of, I think, knowing how to handle these players well, because he comes from an academy background. So he's had that experience at Rangers where he's been working with international players, and I think that's important. The quality of Rangers is a lot higher, I would say, than the average Championship team. Yeah. I think Rangers would win the Championship if they were in it. The playing budget at Glasgow Rangers is 62. The wage budget is £62 million per year. So there will be clubs in the Championship that have come down from the Premiership that top that, but not many. Maybe one. But I think Rangers, given the players they're able to attract because of European football, because of the quality of the stadium, because quality of the training ground, because of the ability to win things, I think Rangers can attract better players than most Championship clubs. So I think they would do pretty well, and because of that, he's got real track record now of having spent time at Rangers, of working with players of a really high repute. You know, players like Jermaine Defoe, who obviously had a really, really good spell at Sunderland. Yeah. Players like Kemar Roof, who's obviously done well in the Championship with Leeds under Bielsa. So he knows how to deal with that level of player, and I think he's going to have learned a lot from his time at Rangers, and I'm sure that'll stand him in really, really good stead for Sunderland. I know there's a lot of noise around the appointment. I know that there's Sunderland fans that aren't sure about it, and I can understand on the surface, but from this conversation, I can see young squad. Michael Beale ticks a box there. Real experience of dealing with a low block. Ticks a box there. Experience of European football and going up against teams that want to punch into you. He's done that against Celtic. He's done that in Europe against clubs like PSV. There's a lot of boxes being ticked, you know, that makes sense. And like I say, you look at the previous manager who's well, like Tony Mowbray, a disastrous spell in charge of Celtic. So these things can happen, and I think it's quite an astute. It's quite an astute signing, and you know as well as I know that in the UK sometimes we can be a bit funny about models. You know, like the idea of a head coach and a director of football, and the wisdom of crowds when it comes to transfers and things like that. But this is how elite clubs operate, and I don't think Pep Guardiola, for example, has full control over the transfer system at Man City. I think there's people involved alongside Pep who make these calls. There's a director of recruitment, there's a sporting director, and they'll all work together. That's how big clubs do their business. I mean, Liverpool under Klopp, famously, Klopp didn't want Mo Salah. Yeah. So he didn't want him. It was foisted upon him. He was outbid, and I think he's pretty glad that he was pushed into it. And that's just the way it works. So Michael Beale understands that. I think he's at a stage in his career where he's probably almost having had that time at Rangers. I think, again, he's not told me this. I don't know this for sure. I suspect he'll look back on his time at Rangers and say, I bit off more than I could chew when Ross Wilson left. I think Michael Beale wanted to take control of the club. I think he was quite happy to take on the extra responsibility, but I think with time and space, he maybe look back and say, you know what, I had enough on my plate. Just dealing with the media, just dealing with the squad, without being jetting off to meet people in Italy, to meet people all over Europe to discuss transfers. That could have been something that gave me the space to do more work with my players and concentrate more on the day-to-day matters. It'd be interesting to hear what he has to say about that. I suspect that's the issue, and he's kind of already touched on that, hasn't he, by talking about being dragged into other areas.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I think that's a fair reflection.
Yeah, he said as well, didn't he, that he wants to be a head coach. He doesn't want to be a manager. He wants to be the head coach. He said his best work is out on the grass. So that aligns perfectly with what you're saying. He touched on Scott Wilson's departure as well. And said, Ross Wilson, sorry, and said that, that it did change his role. It changed the club, and it changed his approach to how he took charge of things at Ibrox.
Yeah, I think Ross Wilson was in charge throughout a large proportion of the Gerrard era. So, Michael Beale's always said they had a really good working relationship, and Ross Wilson himself was coming under a lot of pressure for his recruitment. Recruitment's not been good at Rangers for a long time, and actually Rangers have just spent quite a lot of money rejigging entirely their system, a real focus on data now, and they've just hired a guy called Niels Koppen who's come in from Feyenoord, who's going to be the director of recruitment, because they felt like Ross Wilson became a lightning rod for criticism about recruitment, when in actual fact it was only one portion of his job, and it wasn't really kind of the right structure. So they've completely redone it. So Michael did, there's no doubt, take a lot of control of the recruitment, and it was players that Rangers have been tracking over a longer period, but also ones that Michael Beale knew. For example, Sam Lammers, who have said is just not working out.
Yeah,
as a guy Beale knew from his youth coaching days, and felt like he could get something out of him. And you can see why, because Lammers is a talented footballer, but he's He's not a good fit for Rangers. He doesn't have the ability to. He's got the ability, but he doesn't have the mentality to impact on games, and that's what we're seeing so far. But I mean, just to sum up, I think this is a clever fit for all concerned, and
yeah, definitely.
I think once you get through the noise, and I think once fans hear what he's got to say, he's a very good talker. He talks a lot. You'll find this. He's happy to open up, and if there's injuries at the club or if there's transfers, I don't think you'll be short of copy, because I think he wants the fans to feel like they know what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas some managers are completely shut up and don't want any information out. So, for example, the manager previous to Michael Beale, Giovanni van Bronckhorst, was media trained within an inch of his life, having been the Holland captain and having played at Arsenal and Barcelona. And he just didn't give any information out really at all. So it's quite difficult when it was press conference day, because there was just very little of interest coming out. Beale was just a complete breath of fresh air in that regard, because you could ask him a question on just about anything and he would give you a considered answer. So if you threw out an apropos of nothing question about what he wants from youth players, what do they need to show to get in the first team, which I did once, he gave me like a 3-minute answer that was just packed full of detail, packed full of insight. And that's what you get with Michael Beale. Sometimes he found, I think at times at Rangers, where every word you say is scrutinised because of the size of the club. And listen, Sunderland's a big club too, so I'm sure it'll be the same.
Yeah.
Every word you say is scrutinised. So I think sometimes, he overspoke in terms of he didn't make it easy for himself. So I used the example earlier on about this is going to be a total rebuild. I know I have to get it right on day one. He didn't give himself a lot of room to wiggle out of if it didn't go right on day one. And let's be honest, when you're adding 9 players to a squad and 2 key players have been added to January, so that's 11 players in 6 months, the idea that it would just gel immediately seems unrealistic.
Yeah.
But that was the dream that he was selling. And I think that's where a little bit of inexperience came through. I've seen a lot of long-serving, hard-bitten, experienced Rangers managers in place. We've got one now in Philippe Clement, who's won 3 titles with 2 clubs in Belgium and has been the manager of Monaco and has been a Belgian international. He's got a lot of experience, and he's like that. He's not giving out. He's very, very careful about everything that he says. So there was a red card last night for St Johnstone against Rangers. He was clearly upset and perturbed by a couple of the challenges that went in during the game. And he was asked about it at the presser. Now, if that had been Michael Beale and he was upset, he would have gone both barrels, I'm pretty sure. Whereas Philippe Clement said, I'm boiling right now about this, so it's not the right time for me to speak on it, but I will speak on it. And I think that's just Michael Beale in his first year of management last year and his second year of management this year. It's just learning and making mistakes on the job, as you would expect. And I think that's going to be part of it at Sunderland too. He's an inexperienced manager. He's a young manager. What he can bring in terms of the training field I don't think is up for debate. But you're going to have to accept that you're getting a guy here that I think is really, really well respected and well thought of in England.
Yeah.
But there's going to be the odd thing that he does that as an inexperienced manager without 5 or 6 years behind him, making mistakes at a lower level where nobody notices that are going to come to the fore. And that seems obvious to me.
Jonny, thanks so much. Your insight's been brilliant. I'll let you go because obviously I don't want to keep you all day, but you've been absolutely brilliant, Jonny. Thanks very much. Just a final one from me. Obviously, we are Sunderland. We'll be launching ahead of the derby in January. So stick around, follow us on socials, and thanks again to Jonny for his brilliant insight into Michael Beale's tenure.